Hey everyone, we're at the point in the semester where I've gone through all the material for the class. And as this semester I've got all undergraduate students, typically I've got 90% of my class is graduate students, but this last semester was a little bit strange with registrations. What I thought I would do today is go through several cues that I've written for different films and show them some of my working methods. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. Let's get right into it. What I thought I would do today is just go through several cues, and we can go through what I've done. We can watch some of the film clips. These are projects I've worked on over the past couple of years, so they're fairly recent. I've got the Pro Tools sessions for all my film scores going back to 2004. But the problem with some of those is that the plugins that I've been using, some of them don't exist anymore. They don't load in properly. So some of the reverbs and EQ and stuff like that, I don't use them anymore. I've moved on to different stuff. So these recent ones, everything still is fairly current, and I've done things to future-proof my mixes, which I'll talk about shortly. So let's go to the screen. And this is the first cue for a film I did in 2020 called Once Upon a Comeback. It's an extremely positive, upbeat look at a woman named Dara Torres, and it's a documentary. And you probably don't know who she is, but she is an Olympic swimmer, and she won a gold medal when she was 40, right? So just think about that. Swimmers are done when they're 20, and she came back. So it's a 1 hour documentary that was sponsored by ESPN and the SEC conference, the Southeast something. It's a conference of schools that have a league, like the Big Ten or the Pac-8 or 12 or whatever it is. This is the opening. I have the video. I have the dialogue. The dialogue is roughly mixed. We'll just watch the opening credits, the opening cue, and then I'll break it down. Okay, so some of the dialogue is off. I have so many revisions that it's hard to keep track of what's what. And this wasn't the final mix. This is the mix prep. So the video was pretty tight, and most of the dialogue was pretty good. But about once you started getting to Bob Costas, it started getting a little off with the dialogue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the dialogue for right now, and I'm going to reduce the size of this. All right, so if we look up here, these colorful tracks from here down to here, those are my working tracks. They're mostly MIDI. There's some audio tracks over here, which I'll explain later. And then right here, these tracks that have no color, these are the stems that I mixed down to, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then right here, this is a folder with effects. So let me zoom in on that. So these are my time-based effects. And right when I started working on this film, Pro Tools added folders. So I started using folders, and now I use them much more extensively. They're very helpful. But this is before then. And the way I have this working is I've got all of the stuff that's colored here coming through one of these tracks down here, right? And these are audio tracks. And the way that I'm listening to these audio tracks is notice I've got the green eye. These are all input, I have enabled input monitoring, it's called, so that I can hear all that stuff when it's not recording. So I have my winds up here, right? Let me get that here and zoom in so you could see it on your laptops a little better. Right? Flute, short oboe, long oboe, bassoon, whoops, whoa. Something called Kepler winds, which I'll talk about, and that is an audio track because it's very CPU heavy. I had to render that as audio. And then I've got my female vocals here in that magenta kind of color. This is a synth sound here. This is a felt piano called una corda, and then this is my regular piano. And then it's called Hauschka. It's a library of prepared piano, which is when they put stuff in a piano and make noises with it. So, they'll put like paper clips on strings. They'll put all sorts of stuff on the strings, and when they play, and then maybe they'll snap the strings instead of playing it from the key, and they get these really weird sounds, right? And then this is another synth sound, and then these industrial hits, these are accents. These are things I recorded in the hallway of my old apartment in the city, and then my percussion. Then I've got some guitar stuff right here, which are all synths, sampled. I didn't play them. I just didn't feel like doing it on this. And then electric bass, and then all of these sort of greenish colors. These are all strings, different kinds of strings, and then an upright bass, and then these reddish colors are wood blocks, and those are audio files, and they're all going into one of these tracks, these audio tracks. And then below that are my time-based effects. And with the audio tracks, I've got the sends going to the kind of reverb and things that I want them to go to. For certain things, I've taught you guys to do time-based effects on all your sends. Well, working this way, I sometimes this is a delay, an echo plugin. I sometimes put these in right inside the track because it's an effect that's going to be used all the time on that particular track. And then you'll notice up here, I've got my markers, right, all set up. So the reason I do this is that some of these cues get up to like 60 or 70 tracks. I don't want to send 60 or 70 tracks to the mix engineer, right? I only want to send stems. So I've reduced this track. This is like 37 tracks, and I've reduced this down to about a dozen tracks. And I've kept certain things isolated, like the pizzicato bass here, but I've got things set up: pizzicato bass, long strings, short strings. This is the electric bass. I set up the guitars, my drum kits, 2 different percussion, synths, vocals, and winds. So that 5 tracks of winds is set up as one stereo track. And then these are all audio files over here. I can make that look more prominent. And then what I'll do is I'm only using plugins that I know my mix engineer has, right? So what I do is that once I'm finished with the cue and everything's done, I highlight those tracks and I save them as a new session. Or I get an entire act, I set it up so that I import every one of these stem sessions into the act, the master session for the act, so that the first cue will be at the beginning, the second cue will go next, and then I checkerboard, or I just stack the tracks so that the stems, there's like the 12 stems here for Q1, and then for Q2 the 12 stems are here, and there's markers for where each cue is supposed to start off to the mix engineer. So he's got my stems for each cue on one act, and each cue has like about 12. Sometimes I can get it down to 8, 10 stems. Also, what's good about that is that we can control the level against the dialogue a lot better, because let's say for just a regular CD or soundtrack album release, the strings are great in that particular section. Well, about 10 seconds in, the strings sort of clash with the dialogue, so he can just dip them down very easily. And it just makes it a lot more, gives him a lot of control without letting him change my mix that much, because sounds pretty good the way it is. I don't want it changed that much, but I just want it cleaned up and tightened up. And I want to make sure that I've got the proper time-based effects, and it doesn't get in the way of the dialogue and the sound effects and everything. Let's break this down. So let's just solo the winds. Right, so I've got this. Now, if we look here, from here to here, I have the short oboe and then the long note here. They make sounds where you can key switch to change the patch, or you can use other means to change the patch. It gets a little confusing for me. This is shorts and this track is long. Very easy for me to deal with, especially this is not a very large score in terms of instruments, numbers of instruments. Right, and then it repeats. And then there's this this right here. Right, that's this library called Kepler Winds, and what they've done is they've set up in Contact. They've done a bunch of scripting, and where you can set up multi-rhythms, sort of like systems music, like Steve Reich or Philip Glass, but it's incredibly CPU heavy. And then I transfer that down right to the bassoon. So I play the first time the melody's on the oboe. And then now I play the same melody. Oh, sorry. It would be nice if I soloed it on the bassoon. And then in context with everything else, there is this felt piano that's giving me the intro. Now, you think about this, when you're underwater and you get water in your ears, and the way things sort of sound when you're underwater and you're hearing stuff outside the pool. I tried to make it so that this particular piano sounded like it was coming from the pool, right? And I did that with a series of 3 different reverbs. So the first one is, if I mute them, this is the sound, this is the sound dry. It's very soft. Just adds a tiny, I'll exaggerate it right now so you can hear it. Right, it's a very short reverb. It just adds a little bit of a sheen around the note, right? Then the second reverb that I added was something from this company called New Neighbor called Wet Reverb, and it does really cool harmonic stuff. I actually got this when it first came out on sale for like $35, and I have the guitar pedal that uses this algorithms, which is why I went for it. So you can hear it's not on a lot, but it adds a longer shimmer to the sound. So if I turned up the send on this, oh, I have that. Whoops, wrong thing. Pianos, wet reverb. Here we go. Right, you can see it's really got an interesting timbre to it. And then the next reverb that I used is something called Adaptiverb. And what this does, this is an incredible reverb, but it's very expensive and it's very CPU heavy. So much CPU, and it creates a lot of latency. So much so, yeah, Black Hole, right? Yeah, Black Hole is great. I have that from Eventide. It's funny because I got the plugin for free because I own their H9 pedal, and they decided at some point anybody who owns the pedal gets the gets the reverb for free. So this is a really amazing, it's expensive, but it's really great for doing ambient stuff because it adds harmonic sheen to a sound. And the final layer of the piano has this on it. So I'm going to mute the piano, and all you hear is the Adaptiverb because I have it going pre-fader. Here, let's do it again. Turn it up. Right, it's like sounds like an ethereal choir in the background. So it's really cool, right? So that's where your knowledge of production skills can enhance your compositional techniques. And no, it doesn't look like I've taken the high end off of, well, yeah, on this one, I've cut off some of the high end. All right, let's continue on. Okay, so let's unsolo the piano. So we start off with that little piano figure, right? With just very simple winds. Now notice the first time we see her up here, right? I keep the groove going, but I add another instrument in, which is the low strings, these pizzicato strings, which are right over here. Oh, and that's doubled with the bass. So you see the combination of the two of those? So that's like an upright bass. You get a really nice groove going. It adds just a little bit of momentum. So your variation, remember I've talked about that often. And now vocals. Okay, so you saw that montage of pictures there? So let me just solo. There's this, right? And then there's this industrial hit that comes in. And that's something that I did in my, this is a sound that I created in my old apartment in the hallway with just a little Zoom handheld recorder. I went out and I forget exactly what I did. I think I hit something with my hand, and there's like a tremendous reverb in the stair. It was in the stairwell, actually. You know, so you imagine like a 18-story building, like the stairwell, you get the whole depth of it. You can hear sound all over. So those two things together, all that stuff together. And the industrial hit, if I solo it, right, it's got a couple of different reverbs on it. Again, I'm just, you know, making it, we're talking about swimming, so things are wet. And then the next time that the little melody comes in, right, I've varied it a little bit. I changed the rhythm, and it's flute and oboe. So the story changes here. You see that she's got this interesting look on her face because she's been questioned. And when that happens, I change the music, right? 2, 3. So she made that facial expression, and that was a great place for me to change the music. Yes, that's true. I'm going to show you in a future, like the next one or one of the next cues, how I used basketballs in a basketball documentary. Okay, so we're doing this ascending bit here, right? And I've got this cool thing in the choir. And let me play that with the piano. See how they lock together? That's really a big part of my orchestrational technique. And then there's this. That's that prepared piano. And then with the piano. And then with the choir. You see how that all those things combine together to make a nice, it's moving, right? But it's not this heavy rhythm that hits you in the face, because that's not what's happening right now. And then there's, you know, the strings, adding the low end. And then right here, I've got something that sounds like it's floating, and then that's a combination of this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, right? It's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I've got that. Right, this really bizarre sound. And I've got this little rhythm here. It's not regular, you know what I mean? And when you combine the three of those together, and then there's like this little cluster of two notes here in the choir. So what I had to do here was I had to make a measure of 3/8 in order to get this to time out correctly. So that's a little tricky. So I've got this repetitive rhythm thing. So this I did in this software called Omnisphere. So that's pretty cool. And that doubles with the choir. And then the piano. Now, I want to show you something on the piano, how right here, you'll see that these notes, it's really a pattern of, it's 7 notes. They don't really line up like on the grid really well. It's just this pattern that I played in freehand, and I didn't really worry about quantizing anything. And so you could see where it doesn't really fit on the grid, you know? It's just this wash of sound, and it works really well with this. And then this next bit is the same thing. I didn't really play anything that's in that section. I didn't play anything that was a regular pattern, right? I'm trying to keep things to sound irregular, and it works well with this track here. Then I went from ahs to oohs. Got some low notes on the piano. And those are kind of cool because of the processing, right? So if I go down and I look for those low notes, so like if I just click on this, right, you can hear the processing really makes this beautiful texture. It's really great. So now in that section there where everything's sort of random with the piano, I've got that going against these two instruments. And you notice the rhythm on the low strings, the pizzicato strings, matches up with some of the picture change. Right. So these are just little things that really add up to quite a bit when you put them all together. You know, if you listen to this piano, you can see that there's not a lot of notes there. It's not a lot of notes. It's not thick. But with that processing, all the sound happening after the note starts to build up. Right? And it sounds like a whole symphony with just a few notes. It's a technique that I learned from Brian Eno and Harold Budd. Harold Budd is an American composer. He must be in his 80s now. And I believe he taught at Mills College for a while in the Bay Area in the early 70s. And he got very interested in writing very minimal music. And he put out some albums that Brian Eno produced where Brian Eno would set up these very elaborate chains of treatments on the acoustic piano, and they would sound sort of like that piano there, and he would just sit down and start improvising stuff with headphones on, not being able to hear the sound of the acoustic piano, only the treatments. And after a while of doing this, he started developing this bit where he would play very little music and just let the effects chains fill in the sound, right? Because there were pitch shifting, there were delays, there was reverb, all sorts of stuff combined together. There was, distortion, and very influential music to a lot of film composers and to the whole ambient new age scene. This was in the late 70s that he started doing this. Ambient Plateau I think is the name of the album. All right. So this ends, and now we've got this bit with ESPN Films, right? All I did was I took the sound of a wood block, recorded it as audio, and placed it on the timeline wherever the scene changed, right? I didn't worry about whether it was in time, whether it was on a beat, where it was off a beat. It was where the picture changed. And it ends up sounding almost, because they did it almost in a rhythm, it sounds like it's in time, right? And now we're into the next section. And we get started off here with this green track, which is the industrial hit reversed. So I just put the sound here, and I went to Audio Suite, and I went to Other, and I went to Reverse right here. And then that came up, and I just reversed the sound. And then I just played around with where it should be, because you can see it's not really on the grid, but it works out really well. And then I have this shaker bit that's going to be very... Right? I recorded that as audio. And at this point, we've got a total change in style and sound, right? So we've got this rhythm section coming in. Just a hi-hat with some act, and 1, 2, 3, 4 on the backbeat. And then we've got the shaker with that. And then what I add to that is guitar harmonics, and I have a tapped delay, or a two-sided delay. So on the left side, I've got eighth notes, and on the right side, I've got dotted eighth notes. I've taught you guys this technique in our production classes, right? I teach you stuff that's useful, right? That's why I'm doing that stuff. And it can add, you can play a very simple part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the echo boy, and I'm going to play the guitar part. You're going to see it's stupid. Right? But if we bring in the echo boy, right? Now we're getting somewhere. There's this movie called It Might Get Loud, and it features Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, The Edge from U2, and Jack White from the Raconteurs and the White Stripes, and now he's got a solo career. He's very, very successful. And there's this one thing where they're in the Edge's studio on some waterfront in Dublin or something like that, or somewhere in Ireland. And he's talking about how he uses effects. And he's playing this part, and what's coming out of the speakers is unbelievably complex. Then he turns everything off, and he's just going boom, bum, 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 bum. But because he's got multiple delay effects and reverbs and distortions and all sorts of sounds all combined together, it came out sounding like a symphony of guitars. You know, it's really wild. Anyway, that's sort of where I learned some of this stuff from. So you can get ideas from anybody. All right, so let's see. What else is there? Then we've got this thing here called, these are pulses. Right? They're like these long, low strings that you can see that the sound is changing subtly over time. Low strings. So let's, and anything else? Oh, we've got this here, which is, it's not cheating, but I use these, a library that has, they wanted female vocals, but when I work with these people, I can't really get people in to sing because they change things, and it's like literally I have to do 3 or 4 revisions on every cue, even if after they approve it, because then their videos have to get re-edited because ESPN has like 2 or 3 layers of corporate approval, and then the SEC conference has another one. So they've got 4 or 5 different people above them that they have to satisfy. So it makes it very difficult to hire live players for their stuff. So I used a sample library of vocal phrases, and it worked out really well. So let's take it right from where the time is. Right, you notice there's pizzicato strings come in there. And now the short strings. I wanted something here to be playful, energetic, and have like a melodic phrase that was ascending all the time, upbeat, lifting. And it's just the 1 chord to the 4 chord with the string figure over it. Well, a little different there. And now the second time through, the drums. This project, I don't know, it was like 6 weeks. It was 6 weeks, Lucas. I think I was done with the score in about 3 weeks, and then there was 3 weeks worth of them having to get approvals. It was brutal. It's always brutal. So, over the time that I've been working with this company, which has been which has been 20 years, I've had to learn how to do things that make it easier to change the music later to fit the new edits, right? It ends up being that the music you write isn't as good, doesn't sound as good as what you originally wrote, but it all works. And then there's just that little drum fill there at the end, which is kind of cool. All right, so that's this cue. Wow, 50 minutes on a on a 2.5 minute cue. There's just, it goes by so quickly. But when you break down a cue like this, I hope you're seeing that there are all these subtle attention to detail and orchestration and little things that come in here and there that don't sound like a lot on their own, but when you add it to the aggregate whole, they help you tell the story, right? And also, I'm not writing any kind of music that can't be spoken over. That's really something especially for documentary work, where you really need to get that together, because if you can't, they'll turn your music down so low you can't hear it. It sounds like annoying gnats flying in the background. All right, let's take a look at another one. I had you watch that video on creating a demo suite. And the reason I did that, and that's something that I've been doing lately much more. Once you've done that, it could take me like 10 days to write a 5-minute demo suite, or 2 weeks to write like a 7-minute demo suite. I'll do that before they start even cutting the film. based upon discussions. If they like that and it works out, you've just gotten through like the most difficult part of the film score, is creating your content. And then once you start scoring the film, you can make like little quick sheet music of the cues, and you put your template together, and then you start writing. You can always refer back to that stuff, which makes things a lot quicker when you're working. You can just pump out so much music every day much more quickly when you've got all that, the basic ideas together. So, all right, so this is a little bit later on, so let's take a listen to this. And let's watch this. Okay, so that's a pretty long cue. Let's see, how long is it exactly? It's 4.5 minutes. And there's more instruments in it. I'm going to move this away. I'm going to mute the dialogue. Now, when you notice that I've got all of these stems going through a music track, and that means I have a master volume control for the entire score. And you notice that in a couple of spots, like here and here, I dipped the volume down so that it wasn't getting in the way of the dialogue on the film. And when Ronald Reagan was talking, the background noise on that, which they couldn't remove really well for some reason, was so pronounced that it was taking up so much of the sonic space that it made it really difficult for me to fit any music in there. So just brought the volume down there. So again, we've got a lot of different tracks, but what you'll notice is that there's not all the tracks are playing all the time. You know what I mean? I've got all those different tracks there for different colors, but they come in at specific spots, and that's part of orchestration. Let's take it right from the top. So I start off with just this little rhythm, and then there's this drum here called a wave drum. Which is this, and I'm playing it with my hand, and it's a really cool instrument. I picked it up just for this job. So it's like a kunga, but it does all sorts of synthesis stuff in here, and depending upon where you hit it on the side of on the metal side or on the skin here, on different parts of the skin, and it's pressure sensitive, you can change the timbre, and it's got a bunch of different sounds in here that you can, like hundreds and hundreds of sounds. Some are like samples of acoustic and percussion instruments, and some of them are just really bizarre sound design. So this is just like a hand drum. Let me bring the volume on that up. So, yeah, it's always nice to play some stuff live. Right, so that's this piano with that treatment, so that the piano almost becomes like a part of the sound of the piano becomes like a leitmotif that comes back in and reminds you of the score. And then I've got that same synth patch. It's really quiet. Why is it not sounding? Let's go down here. Huh. That's really bizarre. Yeah, you can hear it in the background. And this is just nothing deep, nothing heavy. It's just it's just music to move the story along. And then I change key. So I go from the major down to the 6th chord, the relative minor. Nothing, no big deal. But what I do here that's kind of cool is I just do a little contrary motion in the strings. So you hear that, those strings there, they're really cool. A thing about them is, let's see, short strings. Why is that not playing? Right, so it's a combination of several different sounds playing together. So it's short strings, and it's something called coligno, which some of you know what that is, but that's basically taking the back of the bow and bouncing it against the strings, and it's sort of like it's almost like a slap funk bass, and yeah. So we're just getting a little bit more intense here. And now we're just into this nice, almost a Brazilian groove, believe it or not. It almost sounds like a Pat Metheny tune at that point, but got those guitars, my hand percussion, right? And the strings continue on. Right, and boing, acoustic bass. So that's really a nice groove. And then there's this vocal bit and the piano. So this is another technique of orchestration that I do, and I find it very useful. Is I have a sound, and then the answer or the finishing of the statement. So if it's boo, bam, bam, if that's the phrase I'm using, the first part of it will come in on those vocals, and then it'll be finished by the piano. Right? Well, it actually is finished by the choir, but you can see what I'm talking about there. And then right here in this spot, which is kind of cool, we have the winds with the choir. That's that Kepler doing those pulsy things. And then there's a percussion here. Right, the marimbas. So, you know, a simple little cue can have so much detail to it. And with this really, I'm in 7/8, so I've changed my time signature here. Right, so that plays against what was going on in the other instruments. Right, and that's these strings here. Right, that's these instruments here. Right, so that you could see, I'm playing it on the keyboard now. So it's just basically tremolo, I think, right? Let's see. Long tremolo, yep. And then that goes against these strings here. And then these are more strings with these really spacious just all these subtle motions in that, just in the sample. More just like, just keeping the groove going here. Nothing deep or heavy. So this is cool right here, right? So I'm in 7/8, so I changed my time signature. Let's go down to the audio. So we've got these strings here, the short strings. So really spiky low strings, and then those Colenio. Bum, 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 bum. Just moving everything up a minor third. And then there are these synths. Bang, right? And what they do is they add just a little percussion to the piano part. So let me just solo the piano there. The piano does, whoops, one sec. And then let me add that percussive synth back in. Right? And then there's choir. So, all these, not doing a lot of busy notes, but that all sort of fits together. Really, I think it really works well. Right, so I go up a minor third, and I make it a little bit thicker, the orchestration. And then now Reagan is going to be speaking here. Keep the music really sparse there, right? And so this way you can hear that I can talk right now and you can hear everything I'm saying. But I want to lead to a section that's moving, so I've got these ascending lines. I've got trumpets here somewhere. Is that trumpets? Yeah, it's. I have it in with the winds. I just didn't want to have a separate trap for trumpets, so. And then there's this beautiful solo cello sound here that works out really well. And then there's these long strings. Really ethereal. So then now we go into, right. So what this is a variation on that other bit with the guitars, with the, right? Because I'm doing the same thing with the rhythm, and it's the same sound. So that becomes like a part of the through line. And then there's the synths. So yeah, you can see that there's lots of changes here, right? And how I sort of try to go through them all. But the effect of all this, and a lot of it has to do with the orchestration that I'm choosing, because the musical ideas are very simple here, but I'm expanding them out through the use of orchestration and through sort of like an unfolding kaleidoscope of different colors. And I find that to be really effective in film because I'm able to make a piece of music that doesn't get in the way of the dialogue. And what's keeping the interest is the shifting colors rather than having lots of fast notes being played all the time. And then at the end, there's just sort of a variation, I think, on... Yeah, that's just a variation on the open. Right, you remember that. Now, let me show you, there's some stuff in here that I liked. So what I did was I just really quickly made it into... I just exported a score from Pro Tools. And then what I can do with this is I put it into Sibelius and I put it into this font that I can read. And then now, right, I've got all this here. Right, so this is from the opening. I made this. And I imported it into this session here. And then I'm able to, if I want to recreate this bit here, I've got it all written right here. It's very easy for me to just read through this, even though this is very rough score with really bad stuff that's not great notation-wise, But it's all right here, and I can just sort of zoom in on something. I can have it on my second screen where I refer to it, and I can just read through this stuff and play it in again without having to worry about creating new parts and stuff. And I don't like to copy the MIDI from the previous cue. I prefer playing it back in. It doesn't take me that long to do. And it gives it a sense of a different performance, even if I'm playing similar notes. And I can just do variations off this stuff. The next one I'm going to do is another sports film. It's called... No, it was a 3-episode series I did for the Peacock net streaming service. It was on earlier this year. And it was about... I think when I was in high school, there was this Title IX thing that passed. And basically what Title IX did was any academic situation that accepted any kind of federal funding had to equally fund things for everyone. So up until that point, men's sports got all the money and women's sports got short shrift. Well, that changed somewhat after this ruling. So the 96 effect is these are the first women that were athletes, and this was the American soccer team, female soccer team, that had grown up with this in place. So it affected their childhood, that there were sports that were funded that while they were growing up that their parents didn't have. And that was sort of what it was about. So let's take a listen to how I put things together once I get 2-track mixes of everything, right? So once everything is mixed down to 2 tracks, I put it into a session here, which is just basically these 4 tracks right here. And things are sort of checkerboarded together where they're on different audio tracks, and you can just give this to the guy who's mixing the film, and he can import it into his session. So I'm doing this in terms of in the timeline of when I wrote the music. So the Dara Torres I wrote in 20, this I wrote in 21, and the next one I wrote earlier this year. Right, so this is really nice. And then if I need to do some quick edits, I'm able to do that. I had to edit here a different cue. They did even after the music was finished mixing, they still had to edit some stuff and change it. So you always have to be flexible enough. And you can't even tell that that's an edit there. So you can see this music is much more energetic than the last film because there's a lot of footage of people doing stuff. So that's sort of, the very final thing that you hand to the guy that's going to mix the film is this. So I hire somebody to mix the music, and the production company hires somebody to mix the film. I get the music mixed so that it's about 90% of the way there, but the engineer does that last 10% that really saves, he balances things out against the dialogue. He makes sure that I haven't mixed something and it gets in the way of some sound effect that's going to be taking up all the low frequencies. And then they hire somebody to mix the film. All right, so that's this one here. And then the next one we'll look at is about this woman named Tamika Catchings. Tamika Catchings is in the Basketball Hall of Fame, and her father, Harvey, played in the NBA for about 10 or 15 years. He wasn't a big star, but he was a good, reliable backup player, and he was tall, and he had a nice career. And Tamika was born almost deaf and with she could hardly speak. So she used basketball to get her through life. And then she went to the University of Tennessee, which was at that time the biggest. It was like UConn is now for women's basketball. They had Pat Summitt was the head coach. And then she went into the WNBA, and she had an incredible career, and now she tries to use her experience to help other other people that have physical disabilities to use sports to get them to assimilate and to feel confident and to have positive lives, right? So it's a really inspiring story. I was really happy to work on it. So the first thing I wanted to do is to start to create my own sound palette. So I'm in the basement of my house, and I've got, a $2,500 microphone to record a basketball, which is kind of ridiculous. But I went downstairs, and I have a little stereo recorder right up here, and I'm recording this. And I'm doing a bunch of different takes, just different single hits, and then I start to dribble at some point. Right, because that's a different thing than trying to play all the different ones together, like put the individual ones together to get a rhythm, and then slapping the ball. Whoops. Anyway, I captured all that and I made sampler instruments, right? I taught you guys how to do that. And yes, when I was young, teenager, I played insane amounts of basketball. I scored 20 points a game, for one season in some of these things. Where's the crossover? Yeah, I'm not Allen Iverson. So I was more the Earl Monroe, Walt Frazier. That's my generation. All right. So I had the spin move behind the back, those kinds of things between the legs, but I don't have a good crossover. But anyway, yeah, I was, very athletic as a teenager, involved in sports all the time. And, it's interesting how this is tangential, but you learn a lot by playing team sports that can be very helpful. You learn how to work with other people. You learn how to be part of an ensemble. But you also learn how to win, and how to really focus in on the things that you need to do to actually be victorious in the event, in the competition. It's like being out in the music industry is like a shark-infested waters, and played in a lot of really intense competition things. Yeah. Yeah, with people get into fist fights and just really not a good situation. Anyway. Okay, so all right, so this is my basketball program, and let's see. After sound design, let me mute the altiverb. Now these are drier. There's the slap. And if I do this, you can see that I've got these mapped down here. And then these here. And instead of doing round robins, I made them, I got this from Junkie XL watching one of his videos, Tom Hulkenberg. Just make them up on the white keys, right? So instead of having to play like, or just make them in a chromatic scale, right? So those are different hits. And so you don't get the machine gun. And these are the shorter ones that I was slapping down there. So you can make those sound a little bit more, when I was doing the faster stuff. It's like that tune by the Fine Young Cannibals. She drives me crazy. It sounds like a basketball. All right. So that's basketballs. Pitch key switches. Pitch key switches. No, I didn't, but I did pitch some of those down, like, right? That's not the pitch. And that's completely processed, and I layered some together, and I have pitch shifted some of them down. I added some distortion. I added a ton of reverb, because that's without any processing. And then when I add the altiverb back in, it's even more. So if I solo this, let's see. So that's big drums. Okay, so I'll play you this cue, but let me just solo the basketballs. So you can hear the basketball with the timpanis. Right, so the basketballs, they sound great. So let me play this cue, and then we'll break it down a little bit. But this is one of the beauty of being a musician who has, almost like pitch drums. Yep. Being a musician, a composer now who not only has musical training or has ideas and wants to be able to create those ideas, but also has a handle on technology, right? Because nobody else in the world has that sample. It's custom made for this particular film, and it's used. I gave the filmmakers just the raw audio of these things, and they placed those things in different spots, and because she's dribbling, and they replaced her dribbling with some of the raw sounds that I made, because they didn't have the environmental sounds attached to it, because she was outdoors dribbling on a court, an asphalt court near her home. So let's take a listen to this. So let's stop that for a second. There's things that are a little bit off timing here for some reason, and let's just listen to the audio. Okay, so, right. All right, so what I did with this, I still have some of the MIDI tracks in here, but I did a different edit here. I guess that must have been it. But we can hear that if I just solo the percussion and the drums. So I've got something that sounds like an urban beat, but it's got orchestral elements to it, you know, and it sort of fits in really well with the topic at hand. And the bass comes in here. So you can really hear the basketball there. I've got these sounds here, which are kind of cool. So those are like really ambient winds that have been processed. And then there's low brass. And that works with the low strings. So you can hear how so with the low strings, I've got a combination of short with the bow and then a colegno at the same time. And then that sort of gives you almost like a subharmonic feeling with the bass, with the brass. And then doubled with the low note on the piano. Yeah, I don't know what happened with that MIDI information. It has nothing to do with what the track was. And we're just listening to the audio now. Anyway, so this is kind of cool what I do at this point here. So I've got the high brass and the low brass. But that, but that. And they've got reverse piano right here. All right, so one other thing I wanted to talk to you about and show you here is that if we look down here on the bottom here, I've got all these tracks here. So this is when as I'm writing and composing, right, I'll put the previous cues onto the timeline. And this way I can get a sense of how the cue fits into the big picture very quickly. And that's just a stereo mix. Right, so you could just hear. You could just go through all these things. Yeah, I had to write this gospel-y thing, which is kind of cool. So the cue comes right out of this. All right, so that's for that. Now I have one more thing I want to show you today, and this is from a film that I scored called Rise 1961, and I did this film in the fall of 2010, and it was part of a Fathom event. And it was, I don't know what it's called now, but it used to be called the Best Buy Theater. It's right by where the Lion King is. They rented out this thing and then this huge event that was broadcast to 550 screens across the United States. And it was this whole event that went on for about 4 hours. And the film was 90 minutes. And it was a really wild experience because I was there with a bunch of my friends and family members came into the city for it. And it was really cool. But I took one of the cues and I reworked it and I released it on an album, and it's on Sirius XM Spa channel quite often. It's been on since 2015. It's really great. I'm really fortunate for that. So what I want to show you here is combining. Irene, please watch that you don't unmute your microphone. That you can combine live musicians with your sampled instruments.
Thank you, man.
All right, so let me play a little bit of this. Okay, everything is sampled except the flute, and there is a couple of spots where I'm using a sampled ocarina, and the vocals. And the vocals are combination of one person overdubbing multiple times and sampled choir. So let's start off with that. Let's take a listen to the choir here, the sampled choir, and that would be this track here. Right, it's got that very processed, breathy voice. And I've EQ'd a lot of the mid-range out of it. And this is like adding a chorusing effect. And there's lots of reverb on that. So that is being doubled by my friend Joy. And she used to, she's a Joy Askew. She's a singer-songwriter. She's active now. And in the 90s, she used to tour with Peter Gabriel. And in the 80s and 90s, she toured with Joe Jackson. There's really an incredible video of her performing at the Sony Studios with the classical soloist Dawn Upshaw and Joy. And they're doing a Joe Jackson neoclassical piece that he wrote. And like Joy is unbelievable, like keeps up with Dawn Upshaw, no problem. It's really an amazing video. So this is her multi-tracked. Right, so she did 2 tracks of soprano, 2 tracks of alto, 2 tracks of tenor, and 2 tracks of the lower part. So saying the same thing, but just doubled it. And then when you blend that in with the choir, sampled, it's really nice. Let's move to another section. Right, there's things that a human can do that samples can't quite cut yet. Right, so that's the ocarina. And that's the ocarina in Expand 2. Just so, you know, I always diss Expand 2, but it can work well. So, and then here's Dave on the flute. So this is Dave Weiss on flute. He plays at The Lion King. We played together at Miss Saigon together. He's really great. And so over here he plays a little more. And what we did here, which we thought of after the fact, is he doubled this on the bass flute. Not exactly perfect, you know, it's really cool. This is a normal flute and a bass flute. Yeah, Lucas. Right, and then the next section with the sampled ocarina comes back in. But because the vocals are taking center stage there, you don't really notice that we're going back to a sampled sound. So this is, again, the benefit of you guys knowing technology is that you can create quite a beautiful score or piece of music and then just move it to that next level by adding some human beings to it and learning how to blend all that together. It works really well. And then right here, we combine the sampled ocarina with the real flute and not phrased perfectly together on purpose. And then if we were to listen to that in the track, it works really well for me. There are times when I want things to be perfectly tight ensemble-wise. This is not one of them. And they're not perfectly in tune either. It works well. So like here, he does something. Bwee, right? You know, you do that on a pitch bend, it doesn't really sound quite as good, but you combine that with the ocarina. And it gives you this really beautiful, ethereal sound, haunting sound that works really well with the composition. Now, this was an effective cue in this film, but if you notice, it's very harmonically static. It's only got a couple of, it's based around a drone, and yeah, the chords move in a few spots, but the whole thing is very static. But again, by having this sort of, I can't stress this enough about how orchestration helps to tell the story of your music, you know, and how you can have something as simple as this. Not simplistic, because there's a lot of detail and there's a lot of subtle things that are going on. But by using your orchestration, learning how to vary the sounds, and also having, for example, with just the flute and the ocarina, sometimes it's the sampled ocarina, sometimes it's the flute. Sometimes it's the flute doubled by the bass flute. Sometimes it's the flute and the ocarina together. And sometimes they're in octaves, spread out apart. So, you know, just if you look at that alone and you think about I set that up as the piece unfolds so that it's not just the same boring thing over and over again. And it develops as the piece moves in time. So there's a temporal element to your orchestrations that help unfold the story. And this is part of telling a story in sound. And when you're writing music for films, you're enhancing a story with sound, right? So it all sort of fits together. It all ties together. And I can't stress enough how orchestration is so essential. And you have this technology at your fingertips. I wish I had it when I was in college, because I remember when I took with Professor Berkowitz, my guru at the Queen's College, when I took orchestration with him, and he was an expert orchestrator. I mean, he worked professionally as an orchestrator for you know, shows that were at the Ed Sullivan Theater, where Letterman was and where Colbert is now, in the 1960s with the CBS Orchestra, which was like a 35 or 40-piece orchestra. And he was working on these variety TV shows, and every week he'd have to orchestrate hundreds of measures of music for the musicians to play. So he was an incredible orchestrator. And when I was taking orchestration with him, you know, he'd hand us these like Mozart and say, and we'd orchestrate. I'd be looking at this music with like boop bop 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 boop bop bop in the left hand and melodies, and like I couldn't. Orchestration was horrible for me. It was horrible. It wasn't until I got with the technology and I could start experimenting around and understanding. Oh, right. I can do this. I can do that. I can try something and hear it and get that in my ears. And that, for me, that really helped me composing with the orchestration. And it also helped that I worked professionally as a keyboard player on Broadway for decades, where I was hearing great orchestrations every night and playing in large orchestras. But more so than that, you guys can't get that experience. You can get the experience of using this technology and experimenting around and growing your orchestration. You know, orchestration is one of the key skills to making incredibly expressive music. You know, and if you look at the history of music, how it unfolded back in the Baroque era, you know, anybody could play that solo. It could be a flute or it could be a trumpet. It didn't matter, you know. But then once you started getting into the Romantic era and people started really not all composers, because Chopin was not a great orchestral composer, and neither was Schumann, even though they're both great composers. But once you start getting, Berlioz was a great orchestrator. Rimsky-Korsakov was an incredible orchestrator. And then once you start getting into, like all the opera music of Wagner and all these other people, the orchestration then started really becoming amazing. And even earlier than that, people like Beethoven and Mozart would work on orchestration as well, but it wasn't as key an element of the music as it was later on, especially once you start getting into the 20th century. And Stravinsky was like an amazing orchestrator. And if you listen to like The Rite of Spring or Petrushka or any of those early ballets, or even if you listen to Les Noches with all those pianos and all that stuff, you just hear this guy who, for example, having a bassoon play at the range where it almost couldn't play, and using that as the opening melody for one of his major pieces, right? Where now that's become something that every bassoon player has to be able to play. But back then it was a struggle, and he wanted it to be that struggle because it fit the music well, right? And just all this stuff. And then Ravel was an amazing orchestrator. Bartok, all the musicians like that, just really orchestration and color started really informing the unfolding of the compositions. So I would just say, for those of you that are not in the music program, just start, listen to some of these people I just mentioned. You might not like the music, but listen to how they put music together. Listen to how, people like James Horner has his music orchestrated. Listen to Thomas Newman, how he has his music orchestrated. Even go back and the Bernard Herrmann, how he orchestrates all the stuff that we're talking about. All of this film music that we've spent the semester going over, even though we've done a lot more composition lessons than I typically do because you're all undergraduate students, we did listen to a lot of film music, and just the use of orchestration in film music is so key to telling the story, and when you combine that with your technology, you can really come up with some really interesting music that works well. You don't have to have a big orchestra to score films, right? We've listened to plenty of music that, like the Ry Cooder was just acoustic guitars, but even that, he orchestrated those with small ensembles. It's really a really big part of being a composer. And yeah, that's really. Anybody have any questions on any of this, or any observations or thoughts that they'd like to add to this? So I think that puts an end to today's class. There was a lot of information there. And I don't expect you guys to be able to do some of the stuff that I showed you today, but hopefully you can glean some information out of that and add it to your own workflow. The thing is that I've probably shown you 10% of what I know in terms of all this stuff. And what I know is probably about 10% of what there is to know about this stuff, or maybe even 5 or 3%, So there's always stuff to learn. I'm always learning. I'm always working on making my music better, even at my advanced age. Because why just do the same thing over and over again, right? Even my workflow has, since I started teaching, my workflow has changed tremendously, and it's much more advanced, much better. And it's much more flexible now. Some of the things I was showing you here has made my life a lot easier. All right, so get the drafts in, and we do have a class next week. And yeah, thank you for letting me talk on you. Have a great night. I'll catch you later.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Professor. Good night.